Hello everyone. We will start in a couple of minutes. Okay. Let's begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining the today's coffee and code session. My name is Natterson and I am a technical account manager at Acumatica. Today I'll be talking about the Acumatica web services, including the REST API contracts and features like OAuth authentication. On the agenda today, we'll be discussing the basics of Acumatica web services, which includes the built-in endpoints, review the system contracts of the built-in endpoint, and create a custom endpoint, and review the basics of the API requests and parameters that are used to modify the data. We'll also briefly discuss about the OAuth authentication framework and the different workflows that are supported in OAuth 2.0 and see how to set up your application in Acumatica. And also, we'll see a demo of the features that we discuss, and beyond that, we'll see how to use reports via Acumatica REST API, and also publish and unpublish packages through the API. And we'll also discuss the recent changes in the current active versions like 24R2, 25R1, and also briefly review the new features that were included in the recent release this week, the current latest version, which is 25R2. And in the end, we'll also briefly discuss about the plans for the Acumatica web services beyond 25R2, and we'll discuss any questions also. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section, and also in the end, we can discuss additional questions. So let's begin. Yeah. So if we think about integrating with Acumatica, the options are like to use REST API, OData to retrieve data from the Acumatica system. And if you plan to use the REST API, then the web services endpoints are the entry to the Acumatica web services. So in all the Acumatica instances, the system endpoints are pre-configured and it need not be maintained. There is also the option to create a custom endpoint by creating it from scratch or extending it from one of the system endpoints. In a REST API call, we need to use the endpoint that we wish to access and the endpoint version, which, for example, is defined here, highlighted here as the default as the endpoint name and 24.200.001 as the endpoint version. If we look at a latest version, the current system endpoints are default 24 R2 version and the manufacturing endpoint of 25 R1 version and the e-commerce endpoint of 24 R2 version. Whenever there is a requirement to add additional entities, fields, or actions that are not mapped in the system endpoint, it can create a custom endpoint. But it is important to remember that if we have a custom endpoint, then it needs to be managed in a customization package and maintained by the ISV creating the custom endpoint. Let us briefly see a demo of the web services endpoint screen and see how to create a custom endpoint and add it to a customization project. So here I have a 25R1 instance setup, and we have the web services endpoint screen in the integration workspace under the web services endpoint. So the screen displays the list of endpoints, system endpoints that are available. And if we take a look at the default endpoint, here in the screen, we can see the endpoint name, endpoint version, and here in the left-hand side, we can see the tree view of the entities and different fields mapped for each entities. For example, if we select the sales order entity, we can see it corresponds to the SO30 1000 screen, and the fields that are mapped to the top level entity, and each top level entity, which here is the sales order, contains sub entities and the actions that are available in the screen under the actions folder in the web services endpoint. On the top, we have the actions like extend endpoint, validate endpoint, and we also have the OpenAPI Swagger JSON definition of the endpoints. So which can be useful in developing integrations with Acumatica. It provides details like the URL that we need to use to access this particular endpoint. So here it is the base URL, that is the URL of your Acumatica instance, followed by the entity keyword and the endpoint name and the endpoint version. So we can also see the different paths that are available through the default endpoint. And for example, if we and yeah, beyond, we also have the parameters that can be used and the fields that are available in each of the entity of the default endpoint. So to create a custom endpoint, we have two options, like I mentioned, to create it from scratch and to extend it from a default endpoint. So we are going to use the extend endpoint action and provide the name of the custom endpoint and the version of the custom endpoint. For the ISV solutions, we recommend to use the solution initials as a prefix to the endpoint name. So for example, if we are using ABC, then we're going to create a custom endpoint called ABC default and use the version 24.200.001. So this action extends the default endpoint and creates a custom endpoint. And if we wanted to add additional fields in the custom endpoint, for example, to the sales order entity, we can go to the fields and use the extend entity. So by default, the arrow here corresponds that this entity is not modified and it is same as the base endpoint that it is extended from. But if you're going to hit the extend entity, it enables the option to add new fields that are not present in the base endpoint, and it shows that this entity is customized now. So let us add a sample field to the extended custom endpoint. So I can use the add row, or it is recommended to use the populate action to find the fields that are not already mapped in the default endpoint. So let's say if I want to add another field from the order summary. So I can select the order summary object and see the fields that are not already mapped. So let's say if I want to add document discounts and select that and adding to the endpoint. So it is available here. So I'll save it and export it to a customization package. So in the customization packages project screen, will create a new customization, and we can add the custom endpoint that we just created to the package. So here on the left hand side in the list, we're going to select the web services endpoint and add the custom endpoint that we just created. So we briefly saw the features that are available in the web services endpoint screen, and we saw about the default system endpoint, the latest version 24.200, and we used the extend endpoint feature to extend the default endpoint to create a custom endpoint with a custom field that was not already mapped in the system endpoint. So moving on, if we briefly talk about the type of requests supported by the Acumatica REST API, it supports most of the HTTP methods like post, put, get, delete, and also starting from 25R1 patch method is supported in the Acumatica REST API. So we usually use the post method to perform the login, logout calls, and also invoke actions from a screen for a document, and we use the put request to create a record or update a record, and get request to create a record, and get the status of an action that we invoked using a post call uh, before getting the get request. We can also use the delete method to delete the record, or use the uh, put method and use the delete parameter to delete a sub entity of a record. We'll briefly discuss about the patch method later in the session, and moving forward, some sample of some frequently used requests are like the base URL, that is the Acumatica instance URL, followed by the entity keyword, and we access the auth endpoint to perform the login logout, and to manipulate the data we access any of the endpoints, either a system endpoint or a custom endpoint, and use the endpoint version and mention the entity that we wanted to access. For example, if it is a sales order, and mention the action that we wanted to invoke, or use the key fields to retrieve a particular record, to fetch the data, or to update a record. In all of the responses of the REST API, we have system fields like the ID, which is a GUID field, which is unique for all the top level entity and the sub entities. And we have the note field, row number, and the custom field. Moving on, we also have the following parameters that can be used to manipulate the record. Like we have the filter to uh, get only specific records, like either filter by at the key fields or filter by the last modified date. Uh, and we have the top and skip parameters that accepts an integer value. So that's going to be used to either get the top 5 records or to skip the top 5 records and get the next 5 records, for example, here. And to get the details of the sub entities, so we have to use the expand parameter. So by default, the sub entities of the top level entities are not returned in the request. So we need to use the expand parameter. For example, if you want to see the details of the sales order, then we have to use the expand parameter to get the sales order details results in the API response. We also have the select parameter that helps us to only fetch the required records, like order type or order number. And the last one would be the custom parameter, which has three known use cases, like if a field is not mapped in the default endpoint, but it is available in the screen, then it can be accessed using this structure, like the view name dot followed by the field name. If it is a field that is present in the sub entity, then we are going to give the top level entity name and the view name dot field name. But again, to get the sub entities, as I mentioned earlier, we need to use the expand parameter. And also, we can access the user defined fields or the custom fields from a customization projects using the custom parameter. So let's have a brief demo of the basic requests and see how to get the status of an action and the response codes that are available to know about the API request status. So a basic request to perform the login would be the auth login call, which needs the user credentials like the username, password, and if it is a multi-tenant instance, to mention the tenant name. So it is a post call, and here the base URL corresponds to my Acumatica instance, and we are logged into the instance. So the sample to use the parameters, like I showed previously, like the parameters can be used in combination. So here we are selecting the order quantity from the sub-entity details. So we are using the expand details parameter, and we're going to filter out the order types by SO and get the records from 6 to 10, skipping the top 5 records. So it is a get request. So here we can see we have 5 records based on the parameter conditions. And last, the custom parameter, like I mentioned here on my instance, I have enabled a user-defined field for the attribute color. So if I wanted to access the user-defined fields or the custom fields from the customization projects, like the user-defined fields, I can use the custom parameter as mentioned here. So Again, here the base URL is going to be my Acumatica instance, followed by the entity, the endpoint name, version, and the top level entity. The sales order. Okay, so let us get available sales order. So 00472. And here in the fields within the custom, we can see the attribute that we defined in the user defined fields. So here for the sales order, I have already added a user defined field. So let's say if you wanted to categorize the sales order, want to set it to red for a important sales order, then we can access that information through the custom parameter. Two other interesting requests are this base URL followed by the entity, so which returns as the details about the instance itself, the version of the instance, and the endpoints that are available in the particular instance. So this call by itself is going to return the Acumatica build version, the database version, and the endpoints that are available in this particular instance. So we have the custom endpoint ABC, the default extended, and the version 24.200.001. And another special request is the $ad hoc schema. So this $ad hoc schema returns the structure of the entity that is defined in the contract, including the custom fields that are available through this entity. So if I perform the get call for this sales order entity using the $ad hoc schema, then we are going to get the structure of the fields that are available in the sales order entity and the sub entities. Like here we can see the sales order details. It has allocations and the custom fields that are available for access using the custom parameter. So this request helps us to identify which fields are available under this entity and the type of field, if it is a custom field that is present under the top level entity or the sub entity. So moving on, in addition to the REST API, Acumatica also supports OData to retrieve data from generic inquiry or DAC-based access to retrieve data from the data access class. However, OData is only used to read data and it cannot write data back to the system. And so we use REST API to write data back to the system. So we briefly saw the basics of REST API, like the endpoints present, creating a custom endpoint, and some of the basic requests. Another part of the web services is Acumatica supports OAuth 2.0 authorization, OAuth 2.0, and authorization framework and the OIDC authentication protocol. So if we do not want to use the basic login logout operation where the user credentials is passed in each request, then we can use the more secure approach using the OAuth authorization, and we can set up the application that is integrating with Acumatica on the connected application screen and use either of the flows that is available in the OAuth 2.0 framework. So Acumatica supports this authorization code implicit resource owner password credentials and hybrid flows to set up the integrating application, the client application with the system. So based on the requirement, we can set up either of the flows, and basically uh, in with the resource owner flow, we are going to directly pass the user credentials and receive a token to access the information from the system. And a more secure approach would be like using either implicit or authentication code, where uh, additional steps like a code is returned back to the client application to fetch the token and to perform the authorization to get the requested data. Um, so if we are trying to use the resource owner password credentials flow, then we need to access the connect endpoint to get the token, providing the grant type, client ID, client secret, the username, password, and the scope of the uh, request in the request body, and we will be receiving the access token in the response. So let us briefly see a demo of how to set up the application on the connected application screen and see a basic authorization request. So if I go back to the instance under integration, we have the connected application screen. And if I want to set up a new client for resource owner authentication, then I'll give a client name. Uh, and we'll select the resource owner, and here we have the option to set up the token different refresh token setting. So either we can have a sliding expiration or the absolute expiration, and we're going to add the client secret. So you just have to make sure to securely save the client secret, as it's only available when it is generated. So I'm going to save it and give a brief description. And so we have the client ID generated when we save the document. So using these details, if we go to the integrating application, so we have to make the post call to the identity connect token. So in the body, I'm going to provide the grant type, the client ID we just generated, the client secret during the setup, and we are going to pass the username, password, and the scope of the access. So here API scope, the options that we have are the API scope. It defines to have the REST API access to the ERP, and the offline access forces the system to provide a refresh token so that can be used to get a new access token. So again, here the base URL is my instance. So right, okay. So I'm using the CC demo instance. So here we are going to receive the access token, and since we have the scope as offline access, we also have the refresh token, which can be used to get a new access token once it's expired. So the token type is bearer. So to retrieve, once we have this authentication done and the access token is received, so to retrieve any data to get, for example, to get a sales order, then we are going to include the authorization parameter in the header of the request with the value as bearer followed by the access token that we just got. I'll just check. Okay, so let us get the sales order 000465. So instead of doing the basic login request by passing the user credentials, by using the OAuth protocol, we are using the access token to retrieve the information. So the resource owner password credential is also going to allow saving the user credentials in the client application. So the client application needs to pass the user ID and password to get the token. A more secure approach would be to use the implicit. So it has um, so the system doesn't, the client application doesn't save the username and password. So the user is prompted to provide access and scope to the client application, and it's going to return the token. Or a more secured access option would be using the authorization code, where uh, there is a second level backend call. So the system returns the authorization code, and the client application has to use the authorization code to get the token, and again use the token to access the data. So to use the implicit methods and authorization code method, we are going to connect to the URL identity connect authorize instead of token that we just saw in the resource owner password credentials. Again, for this flow, we need to do some basic setup in the connected application screen. So let us go back to the connected application and add uh, another client. So for example, if it is implicit demo, then we're going to select the implicit. We would not need shared keys, but we need to have a redirect URI. So we would, so let us save the client ID from the redirect URI. And if we go to the Postman and under the authorization, we have the OAuth 2.2. And to get a new token using the implicit method, we have to provide the callback URL exactly same as the redirect URI that we set up in the connected application screen. So we're going to set it up, and the system has to access the authorized entity. So we have to set the authorization URL and the client ID that we just received during the setup. So the client ID, and again here the scope is either API or API offline access. So we provide these details and get a new token. So the client credentials is not passed in the request, but the client is prompted to log in and authorize. So here we are accepting the offline access scope to the application implicit demo we just set up. Once it is allowed, the system is going to provide again the access token of bearer type. And as we saw previously in the example, we can use this token to get the data from the Acumatica ERP. So hybrid flow is another option which is used when we wanted to set up the OpenID Connect for authentication. It is a combination of the authorization code and the implicit flows. So this was a brief demo of how to set up your application to use OAuth authentication to connect with the Acumatica ERP and retrieve data using REST API calls. So, so after the basics about the REST API calls and the OAuth authentication setup, today we can see some of the less known or used features, but it is that are available to access using the API. So one such feature is that we can retrieve reports through the REST API that was introduced in 23R2. So, but the report type entities are not by default configured in the system endpoints. So we can configure reports as an entity, report type entity to our custom or extended endpoints and access that report entity to generate and fetch reports through API. So let us see a demo of that. So once again, in my web services endpoint screen, I'm going to go to my custom endpoint and add a new top level entity of report type. So for a demo here, today we'll add the report cache account summary. So if you want to retrieve this record, so we're going to create an entity with these details and it's going to be report type. Okay. So we have that entity defined in our custom endpoint. So to access that, let us go back to the Postman. Maybe let us create a new post request. So it is going to be the base URL followed by entity, the custom endpoint and the version. So we have the custom endpoint ABC default and 24.200.001 followed by the top level entity name. So here it's cache account summary, so it's cache account summary. Two things important to note here is like we need to set up the accept parameter in the header. So it's going to be application.pdf, application/pdf if you want to get the report in the PDF format. And starting 24R1, Acumatica also supports the language of the report that we wanted by providing the accept language parameter in the header value. So if we are going to provide star, then it's going to be the default language. And in the post request body, we are going to provide the basic parameters that are required for the report. So for this report, so if we go back to the instance and open the cache account summary, we would need some parameters to generate the report, like the company branch, and we are going to include the non-cleared transactions. So we're going to include those parameters in the request body. And TCC demo, I'll make sure if I'm logged in. Okay. And we're going to send the post request. Okay. So let me go back to the web services endpoint screen. Let me check this and come back to the report. Moving on, we can also see the REST API supports the feature to publish and unpublish customizations using REST API. So for this one, we are going to access the customization API endpoint and call the action publish begin with the request body containing the parameters like the project name contains the list of customizations that we wanted to publish using the API. So if we go back to the demo, so let's see, in the beginning, we created a customization package and we added our custom endpoint to the package demo. So if we wanted to publish this package using REST API on the client instance, then we can use the following post request. So here it is, the instance name is CC demo. Yeah, I wanted to publish the package demo. I'm going to make a post request to the publish begin endpoint, and it is going to return us the log that the publishing is started. And we can check the status of the customization, that is we just started publishing using the publish end call. So we are going to have to continuously send multiple end calls until the log says the customization is published. And other features that are supported by this customization endpoint are the feature to import the package, delete the package, or unpublish all the packages, or get a list of the published packages, or get a list of packages that are available on the instance. Moving on, some other interesting features that are available using the REST API are to get the archived record. So Acumatica supports archival of records, and the records that are archived are not available in the default GET request. But if we include the header px-archive, I think, sorry, here it needs to be px-API archive, and if we set the header value to show, then it's going to show the archived records. So for example, if I go back to my instance, I have enabled the archival feature in the other instance, this one. So to enable that, we have to go to the system preferences archival policy screen, and I have added to have the archival setup for the sales order screen, and we can configure that based on the requirement. And once if we are here and let's say we wanted to archive this record, so I can use this action to archive the record. And if we make a default get call, so let's have a one. So get base URL followed by entity default sales order. Then I'm going to filter the particular record. Order number equal. This one is the other instance. And I might have to log in, but yeah, I've logged in. And back to our get request. It's going to send an empty response because this record is archived. So here we need to include px API archive show. So this request with the header parameter px archive show is going to show the list of archived records. Similarly, another feature by the header parameter is to set the business date. By default, the current date is used as the business date, and the branch or the tenant that we used during the sign-in is going to be used. But if we wanted to modify it for a particular request, then we can use the header parameters px-cb API business date and px-cb API branch to set up the business date and the branch for the particular request. Moving on. So in this request demo, we are able to update the primary key of a field. If we wanted to, we are in the API request, we are identifying the document of the entity using the keys. But if we wanted to update the key itself, then we can use the system field ID, which I mentioned, that would be returned in all the requests. So we can mention the ID and update the key field. For example, for the item IN item xref, the cross references for stock item. If you wanted to update the alternate ID itself, then we can use the ID to locate the record and make a put call to update the alternate ID. Moving on, another scenario that I wanted to discuss today was like using the $custom parameter to fetch the internal keys. In Acumatica, we are seeing the uh, key fields on the screen. Like for example, for inventory ID, we are going to see the string value AA compute for the inventory ID. But if you also want to get the internal key, the integer value of the inventory ID, as I discussed previously, we can use the custom parameter, and that is not mapped by default in the default endpoint. So we're going to use the custom, the view name and the field name of the field that we wanted to access. So moving on, we'll be briefly discussing the recent changes or the features that were introduced in the active versions like 24R1, 24R2, 25R1. One of such feature is to the ability to attach comments to a file. So the ability to attach files using API was previously available, but if we wanted to now add a note or a comment to a file, again, we have to use the header parameter, which in this case is px-cb file comment, and we can provide the name or we can provide the comment or the note that we wanted to attach to a file. So if we quickly go for the demo. So the request is going to be same as the one that we used to attach a file. So an easier way to get the request that we wanted to attach the file is would be to use the get request to get any particular record, and if we see the response, within the response we are going to have the link to access the files. So in the response, it shows this is the put request to attach a file to this particular document. So we can use the same and make it a put. So we have the instance name in the base URL. So we can use the link that we saw on the files, and give a file name, for example, demo.jpg, and upload a file. And in the header, we are going to use the px cd file comment. Demo. Sorry, it is a put record. Is that request? I think I lost that request. So we can again get the request, save it. No, it is a put request. Attach the file and px I'll save this request. Do I have login? I think my postman is blocking the attaching the file, but yeah. So if we move on, there is also this recent feature to track the deleted records that was introduced in 25R1. So that is going to be using the OData request, uh, making the call to get the list of deleted records. To do that, we need to configure the um, DAC that we wanted to track the deleted records in these tables to track deleted record screen. So let us go back to the instance, and if we open the tables to track the deleted record screen, then we can add the sales order DAC. It's SO order. Okay. So after configuring the sales order DAC as a table to track the deleted record, we can use that call to track. Sorry. So if we go back to the postman, again, do I have? Okay. Can make a new request. Can copy the request, and so we are going to track the deleted records for sales order. So the instance is demo. So the format of the request is going to be the base URL followed by the keyword T and mentioning your tenant name, even if it is a single tenant instance, and the API, OData, and the DAG that specifies the SO order DAG, and the PX deleted records method. So it's going to be a get. Sorry, I have to do the I'll do the basic authentication for this OData call. So it's going to display the note ID of the deleted records and the date it was deleted. Another feature that I mentioned earlier, it was like the patch method is going to be supported in the Acumatica REST API starting 25R1. So if you wanted to update a particular field of a record, we can use the patch method instead of the put request, where we have to send the entire data of the entity to update the records. However, one thing important to note here is like the patch method is not going to override the graph business logic. Like if the field defaulting or if an event overrides the value that we set using the patch method, then it is not going to be updated. So if we move on to the features that were recently introduced in the 25R2 version that was released this week, then here in 25R2 we have a new default endpoint called 25.200.001. With the introduction of this new default endpoint, the system endpoints supported for technical validation is going to be 23.200, 24.200, and the latest 25.200. So we are continuously making improvements to the default system endpoints. So as a part of the improvements in the default endpoint 25.200, we have the employee workgroup information available, and we have the time zone field introduced for the time entry entity, and the address fields now adhere to the ISO standard, so it is going to have all the fields based on the standard. So it makes integration easier with other applications if the address field contains data like the state, province, or the street number and those things. And there is the introduction of retainage document details for the bill, and the local information for the business account. So in our 22R2 instance, if we go back to the web services endpoint screen, we have the default 25R2 endpoint. So as I mentioned, the improvements to the entities and the fields are included in the latest endpoint. So if we go to the employee, the company tree information and the fields associated with are available for access in the system endpoint, and the time entry has the time zone. In addition to the enhancement to the system endpoint itself, the features that are introduced in the 25R2 are like the introduction of a date only field. So for example, previously we used to have the date type field set up as date time, but now we have a new field type called date only, which returns the date only part of the value stored in the field, and that can also be used to filter the records using date only. And the workflow actions that are configured for a graph is also now available in the REST API call, so we can identify if the action is not configured in the entity itself, then we can get the details of the workflow action through a get call. And once we know the name of the action, and we can invoke the action through the post call. And also, if we have a segment mask for the string fields and it specifies a required format for string fields, then the system is going to make a validation and return 422 error if the string doesn't match the corresponding segment mask. So these are some of the new features in addition to the enhanced default endpoint introduced in the 25R2. So beyond 25R2, the some plans that are uh, some features that are in the planning are like introduction of a dashboard to view the API usage, so we can see the list of requests and the load or the licensing restriction details as a dashboard related to the API integration. And also, we saw previously about the secure access of data using the OAuth authentication and how insecure it is to use the login requests by sending the user credentials when we want to set up each session. So moving forward, like there are plans to remove the basic authentication and introduce the usage of OAuth authentication only. And to facilitate that, like starting 25R2, the technical validation also is not going to support the basic login requests for the REST API. So ISVs would be recommended and encouraged to use the OAuth authentication method, and also to improve the usage of that. Like there are also plans to introduce a connected applications registry for ASVs so that they can manage the OAuth setup for each of the customers in a single place. So these are all just shows the path or the planning that is ahead for the REST API feature within Acumatica, but it's not defined when it's going to be released. I'm sorry, I almost took the whole hour talking about the topics, but we can also review the questions if I hope this session about the basics and the recent features that are included in the recent releases were helpful, and we would review the questions and get back to you